Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. One of the best things about the Browns being done with the coaching search is that we now have a good framework to work with when it comes to what the Browns are going to do in free agency and in the draft, who fits what they want to do offensively and defensively. The Browns have made their plans clear. They have hired Todd Monken, who's going to run and direct the offense as well as call plays for the Cleveland Browns offense. So you can look at the mode of what he's done in the past to find guys who fit it. And then defensively, regardless of whether if Jim Schwartz stays or not, they are not going to departure far from the fundamentals of the system that they've ran the last few years. So we know what to look for defensively for this defense, and we now know what to look for offensively for this defense. So since that's the offensively for this defense, we now know what to look for offensively for the offense. Forgive me, it's been a long week. I'm still recovering from all that travel. But in all seriousness, the Browns now have their direction set for this season. It's been made very clear from Andrew Berry in multiple press conferences now that the Cleveland Browns will spend money in free agency, maybe not on a bunch of 35-year-olds to get over the hump, but they will be willing to spend money in free agency on the offense. They're going to spend draft capital on the offense. There has been a mandate, and I have to give it. I've been critical of his lack of transparency over the years about what the plans are. He's been pretty transparent this offseason. He fired Kevin because of the offensive performance. They brought in Todd Monken because of the resume and the offensive performance. They are planning on making a lot of investment on the offensive side of the ball. It seems like the plan is to put money into the offense, get it to a place to where it can be at least mediocre, let the defense carry you, and hopefully that gets you to a winning football team in 2026. We'll see if they'll be able to get to mediocre because they have huge questions at a lot of key positions on offense, but that seems to be the plan for the Cleveland Browns. So let's go through it. We're going to do free agency, and then tomorrow morning we'll drop a mock draft with this free agency set of moves in mind. But first, I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. So it's Super Bowl week, and I think a fun thing to do with the Sleeper app would be to do at least 5 days of 5 different slips for picks on Sleeper. So every day you watch my channel, I'm going to be going over a different themed pick list that I have in for the Super Bowl. Sometimes you want to go against the grain. Sometimes you want to do what's popular. So what I decided to do today for the Hump Day slip is to use picks that are popular on the app right now. We'll see if consensus knowledge is better than what I know. So a $5 picks here for a $93 payout. Cooper Kupp over 3.5 receptions. Then you have Kenneth Walker with an anytime touchdown here. There's a pick on sale here with Sleeper with Ramondre Stevenson over 39.5 rushing yards. Then you have Drake May over 36.5 rushing yards. And then Travion Henderson over 18.5 rushing yards. So betting a lot on the Patriots' ability to run the ball against the Seattle Seahawks, and then also betting a lot on the Seahawks to be explosive versus the Patriots. So that's what Sleeper has out there. If you want to join the fun and make some picks for the Super Bowl, make sure you use my promo code WORSTTAKE. Get a 100% match on up to $100 when you use my promo code. Now back to the video. Okay, so what have we learned about Todd Monken and what he looks for at some key positions? I've been trying to read up and study and watch some old Todd Monken tape. What I can tell you from my preliminary research of Todd, and I haven't really finished it yet. Obviously, it's going to take about a whole summer and probably a bit into the fall to fully study the Todd Monken offense to a place where I feel confident about it. But, my preliminary research with Todd Monken's offense, it's a lot of counter. There are a lot of RPO elements in this. He likes to attack downhill. He was originally a spread guy, right? He's adjusted his style over the years. He does like a vertical pass scheme. He likes tight ends who can get vertical up the seam. When it comes to the line of scrimmage, you need guards who can move and handle spill technique, as well as a fullback who can kind of be a very versatile player for you, which is going to make sense why one of the signings are going to be like a lock for me for the Browns. He wants wide receivers who are dynamic with the ball and versatile and can get vertical as well. And he wants quarterbacks who are legitimate run threats, because a lot of what he has put into the offenses that he's ran, going from Georgia all the way up to the Ravens, is he likes when linebackers has to hesitate. He kind of uses that to kind of build a lot of what he wants to do offensively. So keeping all of that in mind, who could the Browns add at some key positions on offense? And then I do think they're going to make a move on defense here or there. Probably not a big free agent move, but just re-signing Devin Bush, right? I think that's a move that they make. That being said, let's start with wide receiver. Now, I think the Browns have 3 options here at wide receiver. All of them will probably cost around $15 million, or I think they'll be out at any number over $15 million on all 3 of these options. One of them is a trade. So you have Deebo Samuel. I know a lot of people roll their eyes when they hear the name Deebo Samuel, but he was effective for the Commanders last year. And if you look at what Todd Monken likes to do, Deebo can do those things. Deebo can still be dynamic with the ball in his hands. Deebo can still be versatile, play different wide receiver positions. Deebo can get end around, still have gravity on motion. All of these things Deebo Samuel can provide, and he can provide it at about $15 million a year. And given how overpaid the wide receiver market has been, I think $15 million a year for a guy like Deebo Samuel is a pretty good deal. You get a veteran in the room. You take some pressure off of Jerry Jeudy. You can still open up a slot to draft a Carnell Tate if Carnell Tate is there, or a Jordan Tyson if a Jordan Tyson is there at 6. It allows you the most flexibility. I like the idea of going after Deebo Samuel, especially after Todd Monken has been signed here. I know a lot of people think of Deebo as strictly somebody who's going to work in the Shanahan style, but I think what he showed last year with Cliff Kingsbury is that he can work in a more air raid-based attack, right? And that's what Monken's philosophy is based in, is a more air raid-based attack. So I think Deebo can work here. I think Deebo would make a lot of sense. Another guy who would make some sense is somebody who has experience under Todd Monken, and that's Mike Evans. Now, Mike Evans isn't going to take end arounds or anything like that, but what Mike Evans has always been able to do is be a vertical threat, right? He's going to push the verticality of any defense that he goes against until the day he retires, because he's such a good 50-50 ball guy. He would obviously be a high-tier veteran option. He would be somebody who will be able to be good mentorship to some of the guys in that wide receiver room. He would take a lot of pressure off of Jerry Jeudy, and he would give you a end zone threat. And if you're thinking of pairing him with some of the quarterbacks that we've talked about being available, Geno Smith, Shedeur Sanders, right? These guys who play a little bit more off script more often, which Todd Monken has talked about being okay with in his offense, then Mike Evans even makes a lot more sense, because he is a well-known safety blanket for those kind of quarterbacks. I mean, he gave Johnny Manziel new life in 2014 when he was at Texas A&M and just, I believe, a true freshman. So Mike Evans, definitely somebody I think would make a lot of sense for what the Browns want to do. The question is, does Mike Evans want to come here at the twilight of his career and play for Cleveland for $15 million? I don't know if that's the highest possibility. Brian Thomas Jr. would be the third guy. Like, if we're looking at this packet of guys that are your number one wide receiver, well, not number one options as in like they're number one wide receivers, but number one free agency targets at wide receiver, I would put Brian Thomas Jr. in here as well. You would have to give up a second round pick. The money would be cheaper up front, but then you would have to pay him down the line. he is the one guy that gives you long-term potential as a number one receiver and would tell you that you don't even have to draft a wide receiver at 6. Now, I think a lot of what you're going to do with Brian Thomas early on, well, I think a lot of trading for Brian Thomas has to do with your intel and what your intel is telling you about what and who's going to be available at 6. If you're hearing based from your scouts and the intel that you're gathering that Carnell Tate and Jordan Tyson have a high chance of being there at 6, and Jordan Tyson and Carnell Tate don't have any kind of massive injury red flags that would degrade their draft value significantly, then I think you probably just go ahead and trade and draft one of those two guys and just eschew the idea of going after Brian Thomas. But if you don't feel like you're going to be able to get one of those guys, maybe we could throw Mekhi Lemon into that packet as well, right? If you think that you could get one of those 3 guys, Mekhi Lemon, Carnell Tate, Jordan Tyson, go for it, right, at 6. If you don't feel like you're going to be able to get those guys, or you think that you have a trade back, that is going to be very attractive to you, and maybe it includes you going back to like 14, 15, where you really don't think any of those guys are going to be available, then I think you got to make this move and give up that second, because that gives you the best chance to get a long-term number one option. That's really the question that the Browns have to answer before making or pulling the trigger on the Brian Thomas Jr. thing, right? 1, what do you think is going to be available at 6? 2, what do you think is going to be available in a trade back? Is that trade back going to be attractive enough for you to want to pull the trigger? And if you do jump back to whatever spot that you jump back to, are the wide receiver options as appealing as Brian Thomas Jr.? I think if you go Brian Thomas Jr. and you trade for him, you're clearly trading back out of pick 6 at that point. Because that, even if you wanted to stay at 6 and draft the offensive lineman, the guard class is deep enough to where I don't think you got to draft one at 6 this year. Unless you think that guy can be a tackle. But that's really the only justification. So we'll see what happens there, but those are my 3 options. I think the most realistic is probably Deebo Samuel. I do think Mike Evans can be a bit of a dark horse. Maybe he enjoyed his time with Todd Monken and he wants to reunite with Todd at the end of his career. I think I would enjoy I would be the least nervous about Mike Evans, right? Because I know what Mike Evans has always been. Deebo Samuel's probably what we're looking at, though. So you got to get one of those 3 guys in that packet. I think Deebo's probably the guy that you land. And if you compare Deebo with Carnell Tate and then Jerry Jeudy, I think you can make something with that wide receiver room. Another player that I think they're going to go after is Isaiah Likely. Where people have been asking me, hey, who are going to be the Ravens guys that are going to follow him over? I think it's going to be Isaiah Likely and Pat Ricard. If we look at what Isaiah Likely and what Todd Monken's system offers for a guy like Isaiah Likely, it is a personnel package. It's a offense field of personnel packages that have 2 tight ends on the field, right? That's going to still happen very often. And a lot of the times they'll go out there some 13 or some, they'll have a fullback out there, but it's really 13 personnel. They'll have a lot of different ways of lining up. Where they're going to use Isaiah Likely in conjunction with Harold Fannin. There's some familiarity there with Isaiah Likely that can help Harold Fannin develop in this system. I think it makes sense because Isaiah's not going to be that expensive. And he's young. He fits the mold of what the Browns want, right? Young, up-and-coming free agents. That's who you'll go after. Pat Ricard, age-wise, doesn't fit what the Browns are going to want to do. But I think there's just so few players who could do what Pat Ricard could do, and there's so few systems that make sense for a guy like Pat Ricard that this matchup is inevitable for both of them, right? There's not a lot of offenses that will utilize Pat Ricard in the way that Todd Monken's offense will utilize Pat Ricard, and there's not a lot of guys out there that can replicate what Pat Ricard can do. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, right, you just might think that Pat Ricard is simply a fullback. I'm telling you right now, that's wrong. He is not simply a fullback. He is a 3-position player. At times, he plays tackle for the Baltimore Ravens. At times, he plays tight end. At times, he plays fullback, sometimes a little H. And then he also sometimes, helps out at guard, right? Like with pulling and doing all the things you would expect a guard to do. Think of Pat Ricard as Darnell Washington more than like a fullback. Like that, I think that's a closer analog for Pat Ricard than anything that I've heard on the internet, right? Where people are like, oh, just draft a fullback. You're not going to draft somebody out of college that's going to do what Pat Ricard's doing because they're just simply not going to be big enough to do it. Like what you want Pat Ricard to be and what you have Pat Ricard being, you need to have years of development in the tank for. So while Todd Monken develops the next Pat Ricard behind Pat Ricard, he needs a Pat Ricard. I know some people have floated the idea of throwing Aiden Huntington out there. I think that's a seriously bad idea. You would basically take Aiden Huntington from the defensive side of the ball and have him learn how to play all three of those offensive positions I mentioned that Pat Ricard plays for the team. And I think that's just a waste of Aiden Huntington's talent. Like Aiden Huntington wasn't that good of a fullback. I know everybody got excited about him being in those fullback packages, but really go look at the results. They weren't great out of those formations. He was not great out of those formations. Sure, he could get better, but I'd rather him get better at pass rushing and spend his energy there than trying to be a fullback when he's just not a fullback. It was a fun gimmick that the Browns threw in there last year, but I think that gimmick should probably die this year. I think you should go for Pat Ricard. Pat Ricard makes a ton of sense. There's like two players who can do what Pat Ricard does in the league. And there's like one team that needs what Pat Ricard offers. So pretty easy fit for me. All right, let's talk about the offensive line. Now, again, much like wide receiver, I'm acknowledging that they don't have unlimited funds here. But I do want to point out that there are three players that I want them to get at least one of, right? I think these three players could cost up to 15 to 18 million. I think after that number, if they get above 18 million, I think it's likely that the Browns are out. And when I say 18 million, I'm talking about APY, right? Obviously not the whole deal. Rasheed Walker, the tackle out of Green Bay. Tyler Linderbaum, the center out of Baltimore. Now, the key with all three of these guys, and the reality of all three of these guys is if you sign one of them, this is going to be your marquee free agency signing. This is going to be the most expensive signing you get, which is why all three of these guys fit a very specific and particular mode. These are all guys who are under the age of 27, who will be under 30 by the end of a 3 or 4 year deal that makes sense for the Cleveland Browns and their timeline and where they are, as Andrew Berry likes to say, in their current life cycle. So Rasheed Walker, 25 years old. Tyler Linderbaum, 25 years old. Elijah Vera Tucker, I believe he's 24 years old. All of these guys are younger. They will cost about 15 to 18. Maybe you're willing to go up to even 22 APY for one of these guys. But you got to get one of them, right? You got to get one of them. Which one you get, it's up to your preference. Some people will say that Tyler Linderbaum is the best player out of all of these guys. And I think track record-wise, there's something there. Some people will say that Elijah Vera Tucker has the best upside of all of these guys, and I think that has a lot of, I agree with that take. And then there's Rasheed Walker, who doesn't have the best upside, nor is he the best player of those three, but he plays the most important position and the most difficult position to find, which is left tackle. So you can get a left tackle, you can get a starting center who's going to be really good and familiar with your system in Tyler Linderbaum, or you can get a young guard who's going to be able to do some of the things that you want to have him replace Joe Bitonio in doing. I don't know which way the Browns are going to go with this. The market for Linderbaum looks like it's going to get ridiculous for center. I don't think the Browns are willing to pay more than like $18 million a year for a center, and I think that's fair. I think that's completely fair. I think this draft class has a lot of centers, which makes that position just less value when it comes to money. I'm interested to see if Linderbaum does get the bag because, like, hey, man, there's a lot of guys in this class I think can flip from guard to center. But anyways, for that reason, if it gets past a certain amount, am out on the whole Linderbaum thing. Would he be nice? Would he be a nice tone setter for this offensive line? Yes, but I'm only willing to pay but so much for that. Which brings it down to Elijah Vera Tucker and Rasheed Walker. Again, Elijah Vera Tucker, better player at the guard position and better upside, but he plays guard. Rasheed Walker, he's not as good, but he plays tackle. You at home can decide what's more important to you. Given how much counter that the Browns are going to run, I'm going to go with Elijah Vera Tucker. So I'm going to go with the Browns giving Elijah Vera Tucker about $18 million a year to play guard for him. Now, if you don't get one of these guys, there are some backup options available, right? If you can't land a guard, you can go Kevin Zeitler for about $8 million as a backup option, a Band-Aid for 1 year. You can also give that same $8 million to Isaac Seumalo. You can also, if you miss out on Rasheed Walker, you can go after Jermaine Illuminor, who would be 31 years old, not necessarily fit your timeline, but he would put a Band-Aid over the tackle position because at least he could pass block, but it would be risky nonetheless. So there are some backup options you could do there, but you probably want one from category A and one from category B. If I'm the Browns, I just get like Elijah Vera Tucker, and then maybe I throw a flyer here at somebody I think can play tackle a little bit, right? Like maybe a James Illuminor, maybe even like drop down a tier at tackle and go for somebody who can be more of a swing and a backup tackle. If I prioritize the tackle position in the draft, so maybe you go for a Jonah Williams or something like that. But yeah, you're going to have to do 2 moves at least at offensive line. I think you're going to have to get 2 people that if push comes to shove, one's definitely going to start and the other one could start. And I think that involves either one of Rasheed Walker, Tyler Linderbaum, or Elijah Vera Tucker. And then probably one of Isaac Seumalo, Kevin Zeitler, Jermaine Illuminor. Now, the big thing here is like, if you're just going based on need, you got to go and spend the money on Rasheed Walker because he plays tackle. The draft's good at center. The draft's good at guard. The draft's terrible at tackle. So if you're just doing this based on need and scarcity, Rasheed Walker makes a ton of sense there. And then you can go with something cheaper at guard, like a Zeitler, draft the guard in the 2nd round, still probably be fine up until like the 3rd or even 4th rounds. Get a center in one of those day 2, day 3 picks and kind of build your line that way. I don't think that's the worst thing to do. But if you just want the best player for the best money you can get, it's probably Elijah Vera Tucker, right? Like I think that's probably going to be the best bang for buck that you can get here. You bring back Devin Bush. I think that's the one move on the defense you make. Jason Tarver is back, so Devin Bush comes back. Depth pieces that you would sign on offense. Tevin Jenkins, I would bring back Tevin Jenkins regardless, just to have him as a piece of depth there. He could start potentially, and he'll be on a vet minimum. And then Charlie Kohler, you will probably bring in another guy who could be on a vet minimum, so that way you're not tied to drafting a tight end. But, you know, if you do find one that you like, you can still go after them because you don't have much invested there. All right, let's talk about the quarterbacks. When it comes to searching for quarterbacks for the Cleveland Browns, there are a few distinct categories that I'm going to filter out these guys by. There are quarterbacks that you would bring in that would no doubt be the starter, right? There's not going to be a real competition. You brought this guy in, he's going to be the starting quarterback. There are that tier of guys that you can bring in. There are also quarterbacks that you could go after that you would bring in on a cheap deal or on a cheap trade with the idea of them competing with what's in the room, which is more than likely Shedeur Sanders, right? And then there are quarterback options you could bring in that I would rather see Shedeur Sanders over. If your favorite quarterback name is not on this list, it's more than likely that they fit that category. So, you know, for example, I don't want to bring in Marcus Mariota to compete with Shedeur. At that point, just let Shedeur play the fucking games, right? You know, any of these guys who are always bouncing around, we know what they are. They're not that good. I'm just really not that interested in a journeyman quarterback run. I don't want to see Jimmy Garoppolo here, for example. Like, could Jimmy Garoppolo be better than Shedeur? Probably, or maybe. I don't know. Like, yeah, I think Jimmy Garoppolo's not that good. But I also think Shedeur has a lot to work on before he can get to a point to where he's good, right? So, you know, I don't know which one would be better results win-loss wise. I just don't care. I would rather just go with Shedeur at that point, right? So I'm just going to bring up the ones that I find to be some level of intriguing, right? Not a complete waste of time. So let's go through them. First, you have guys on teams, guys who you would have to acquire because through a trade or they're going to get released later on, right? Kyler Murray. I think all the interest on Kyler Murray is hugely dependent on what it costs to acquire Kyler Murray, whether it be money or draft assets. If it is not expensive to acquire Kyler Murray, I don't mind the ideal of going after Kyler Murray. If all it's going to cost you is $15 to $20 million a year for Kyler Murray, I would much rather spend that money on Kyler than like a completely unknown quantity at the quarterback position. Does Kyler come with his questions? Yes. Kyler is short. He's not as athletic as he used to be, and he's injury prone. But for $20 million, I'm willing to take on that risk. For $40 million or $60 million, that's a complete waste of time. Or if Kyler Murray is demanding draft picks in return for him, it's a complete waste of time. So, yes, Kyler Murray would be interesting to me, but specifically only if his price is 20 or under. If he can't get under 20 a year, then I'm good on the whole Kyler Murray thing. JJ McCarthy. I think this one's going to be under the category of things that are too expensive and just not worth the even energy to ask. JJ McCarthy has not been very good to start his career. Now, again, it was his first year playing, and much like Shador, you're going to give a little bit of slack to JJ for having a bit rough of a first year, right? And Shador's no different. So, maybe you could bring him in to compete in a perfect world if you could bring in JJ on a cheap deal. But let's be real about what the Vikings are going to want to recoup there. They spent a 9th overall pick on JJ McCarthy. And I know the argument is that everybody involved in that decision, well, not everybody, because KOC is still there, right? Quincy got fired, basically. And people think that that's all about what Quincy wanted to do. But I don't know if I'm convinced that's the case, right? JJ McCarthy, that was a group decision. I think KOC was a part of that. So, yeah, I don't think that JJ McCarthy is going to be like a cheap guy to acquire. I think he's going to be much more expensive from a draft asset standpoint to acquire than most people think. He's still super young. JJ is younger than I think every quarterback on the Browns roster right now. Let me double check that. So I'm going to look that up right now. But yeah, JJ is 23 years old, and he turned 23 in January. I know Shador's been 23 the whole season, and Shador turns 24 in... When does Shador Sanders turn 24? Shador turns 24 in 3 days. So soon to be happy birthday, Shador Sanders. He turns 24 February 7th. And then Dylan Gabriel's already almost 25. So he would be young. But him being young, him being the age of basically a rookie this year, means that you're going to pay a premium for that. Him still being on his rookie contract means that you're still going to have to pay a premium on that. And is the juice worth the squeeze there with JJ McCarthy? You can make the argument that, hey, JJ likes to run. And Todd Monken likes guys who can run. And, JJ's a legit run threat. And Todd likes guys who could do that. And maybe Todd looks at JJ McCarthy and sees something in him. But in order for a trade for JJ to happen, which I don't recommend the Browns doing, to be very clear here, it would require the Browns seeing something in JJ McCarthy, more specifically, Todd Monken seeing something in JJ McCarthy that most other teams don't see. And yeah, I don't think the price is going to dip that much on JJ because the Vikings still want to recoup value for that asset, right? He was a 10th overall pick. I think I called him a 9th overall pick earlier. Let me correct that. He's a 10th overall pick. A lot of the people who were there and in on making decision, which is the owner and the head coach, are still there and want to recoup that decision. And he's only 23, which might give them cold feet on letting him go. The internet has made its mind up about JJ McCarthy, but the internet never wanted to draft JJ McCarthy number 10 overall. The Vikings did. And I think they're still going to hold JJ to a higher value than most of the rest of the league would which is going to make any trade for J.J. McCarthy just prohibitively expensive because he hasn't been proven good enough to really spend the kind of assets that you would have to spend to go get him, unless you see something in him that nobody else in the league has seen so far, other than maybe the Minnesota Vikings. That is the only way you justify it. That would be something that Todd Monken has to put his stamp on, and Todd Monken has to be willing to put his name on. If that is not the case, then we can go in a different direction. But I can see the skill set being appealing to Todd Monken. But he also talked about in that video, he wants quarterbacks who can throw it. I don't know if J.J. McCarthy fits that description. All right. Tua, too expensive, not good enough. Do I have to argue with anybody about not wanting Tua? I don't think I got to argue with anybody about not wanting Tua. Now, I want to be careful here because I do think Tua can be an effective quarterback for somebody down the line. I'm not as out on Tua overall as some people are, but I'm not a big fan of Tua in this system. I don't think that's going to be great for Tua. Geno Smith, he'll be cheap. He's old, but I think he could be good for a year. One of the common comps for Shedeur Sanders is Geno Smith, so maybe having Geno here for a year or two is a good thing for Shedeur as he learns behind Geno Smith, and maybe after Geno's run, Shedeur's ready to take the mantle as a starting quarterback, after having a mentor there. Might be the case there with Geno Smith. I don't think this is an option that is stupid on the surface. I think this actually does make some level of sense. Mac Jones, I don't think this is a fit, and I don't think it's worth the price. I know a lot of people are big on Mac Jones. I'm not big on Mac Jones. I'll be honest about it. I've never been a McCorkle Jones fan, so maybe I'm just too tainted to find the value in Mac Jones. I think he is just not what the Todd Monken system wants. Not a run threat, not a real scramble threat, more of a statuesque guy, somebody who works in a rhythm and timing offense. That's not what Todd Monken's system's about. So I just don't see the value in trading a pick for Mac Jones. Anthony Richardson, if it's incredibly cheap, I think I'm willing to take a flyer on it. I think Anthony Richardson can compete with Shedeur. If Anthony Richardson can beat out Shedeur, then let's see what he's got, and we can always play Shedeur later. If Anthony Richardson cannot beat out Shedeur, well, then you got your answer on Anthony Richardson. So there's that. Justin Fields, another similar proposition there. I think a lot of people will feel a lot better about Justin Fields because at this point, Justin Fields is 28? His game is further developed than Anthony Richardson's is. Yeah, Justin Fields is 26. Okay, so he's 3 years older than Anthony Richardson. His game is more developed than Anthony Richardson's. And I think you can make the argument that, hey, if Justin Fields will give you a higher floor than Anthony Richardson, which I think is undeniable at this point, the big question is hey, do you want to go for the upside for the same price on Anthony Richardson, or do you want to go for the upside on Justin? Well, do you want to just sacrifice some upside and live with the floor that Justin Fields can get you? Keep in mind, the floor that Justin Fields can get you was winless for most of the season out there in New York. So it's not like it's a significant floor. And it makes you ask the question, if that's what Justin Fields' floor can provide you, which is the second pick in the draft, then what's the point of choosing him because he has a higher floor? Why not go for the guy with the higher ceiling with Anthony Richardson, because you can get the second overall pick with any quarterback. You know what I mean? Daniel Jones, I think this is just too expensive. The projection on him is $100 million over 3 years or something ridiculous like that. I'm good. Coming off an Achilles, I did not want to underestimate Daniel Jones in this cycle because I did last cycle, but at the price that people are quoting for him, yeah, I'm out. I'm out on that. Russell Wilson, I think this is something that Todd might be attracted to because he might be appealed to the idea of what Russell Wilson used to be, which is a perfect fit for his system. I don't know if that's the Russ that exists today, but if your options become bare, I can see Russell Wilson making sense here. So of all of these options, who do I think is likely to be the quarterback for the Browns or to be brought in as the extra quarterback for the Cleveland Browns? I think Malik Willis is probably going to Miami, so I don't think he's going to be the Browns quarterback. Daniel Jones, too expensive, probably going back to the Colts. So I don't think he's going to be the quarterback. Russell Wilson would probably be hey, we got no moves left, let's go with Russell Wilson move. I think you either end up with Justin Fields, Geno Smith, and I think my two my two dark horses, right? So I think the most likely is Geno Smith or Justin Fields. I think those are the two most likely guys you bring in to be your quarterback, and you probably bring both those guys in to start. You might have a little bit of a competition, but you're probably bringing both those guys in to start. I think there are two dark horses here. Kyler Murray, again, depending on the price, I think it might make sense for the Browns. And J.J. McCarthy, as much as I would not like it, I do think there's going to be an appeal there to Todd Monken and Andrew Berry. Don't know what those guys thought about J.J. McCarthy when he came out of Michigan, but super young, still on a rookie deal, kind of fits the Browns' timeline. It would be a cheap way to basically draft a quarterback this year without really having to draft a quarterback this year. I can see the appeal to it. What would it cost? It wouldn't cost you a first like Ty Simpson would, but it could cost you, a third and a fifth or something like that. And I think even that's being very charitable about what the price could be. And I wouldn't be for it, but I can see a world where, Todd looks at the skill set, says that's what I want, and the Browns go out and get it because the options just aren't that good this offseason. We'll see what they end up doing, but that's my thoughts about Browns free agency now that they have a head coach in place. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.